All right. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Fred. I work here kind of on our ops team and in support at Managed Methods. And we've been running this recurring webinar here for a couple months now. We just kind of pick topics that we think people would find interesting and kind of go over some parts of the product that people might not know exist or need a refresher in. So today I'm going to be going over kind of oversharing and finding risks that aren't being brought to your attention by the product already. By oversharing, I'm talking about people sharing things they shouldn't be, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally. So I will get my screen shared here and we can kind of dive in. I've got Brent Ritter here as well. He's here to answer questions while I'm giving the presentation. So if you have any, feel free to ask them in the chat and he can get those answered for you there. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be talking about oversharing. Specifically, I'm going to be looking at Google here, but the same concepts exist in O365 as well, if anybody's just running an O365 environment. So there's a couple different types of oversharing that happen in people's environments. First type is people just link sharing things unintentionally. Oftentimes users will just create a link share to anybody on the internet because they know when they do that, whoever they're trying to give access to will have access to it. They know it works. They don't really understand what it does. So they click share with everyone and suddenly they've shared, potentially sensitive information out into the world. There are also people who really like to share things with their personal accounts. So they'll have a work account and they'll send it to their personal Gmail or a personal account just to make it easier to get to when they're home or whatever. Then they're sharing to people outside of your domain. So, they'll run into a contractor or someone who needs access to information from another district. So they'll send it over without really thinking about it. A big one that we've started seeing is teachers sharing credentials to substitutes. So they'll just make a big document or Excel sheet, fill it with all their passwords and logins for everything they use, and then they'll just start sharing it with subs when they need to, which just kind of puts the information out into the wild typically. Depending on the setup of your district, they could be sharing it with subs' personal accounts, sharing it with a link, something like that. And then the last one is inherited sharing. And what I'm talking about with that is you can create a folder and you can link share a folder or share a folder with specific users if you want. And people will move documents into that folder, not realizing that everything inside of it has shares that get inherited to files inside of it. Within Managed Methods, kind of where we're going to be looking today is in the Files tab, in the Live Files search, and then in the Managed Drive subtab as well. Brent was actually the one who created the Managed Drives here, so if you guys have questions there, he's a great resource for that. And what we're going to be looking for is kind of file names specifically. The product looks for content, so you can set up risks looking for FERPA information or social security numbers, self-harm, etc. But we're not looking at document names. So oftentimes just looking for document names, we're able to uncover all kinds of stuff that otherwise would have been missed. So what we're going to be doing is looking for file names that might indicate that they're holding sensitive information. Everybody kind of knows their own district best, and these keywords kind of change depending on where you are. So these are just kind of some common ones that all go through. But oftentimes when you start these investigations, you'll kind of follow a little thread. And by a thread, I mean, you'll start putting these in and you'll start to see naming commonalities inside of your environment. And those can help you kind of uncover what might be going on. So some of the things I'll look for is HIPAA, COVID, the word bank, passwords is a great one, or password, credential or credentials, login or logins. Student can be a fun one. Depending on the size of your environment, some of these searches could be really kind of huge and involve thousands and thousands of files. But oftentimes you're able to kind of sort these and figure out where things are going. Look for things like incident, IEP, credit card. And then sometimes I'll just start putting in like different credit card companies, American Express, Visa, Bank of America. And as I kind of work through these, what I'll see is which users are kind of creating these files to store their credentials inside of. Then we're going to take a look at how the files are being shared to identify whether or not these are being used correctly. I'm not really sure there's ever a scenario in which a user should have a document filled with credentials. I think that a password manager or something is a much better solution, and there's a lot of risk that lies in just having a document filled with all of your credentials. Because if your account gets compromised, then they have access to everything else. I'm also going to be paying attention to users that have like a lot of shares involved with them. Those can be indicative of users who aren't understanding how they're sharing things. So when we see huge numbers of shares coming from specific users, oftentimes we can figure out that they have an inherited share from a folder they're putting everything in, or they're just automatically sharing everything by default via link or something like that. Like I just went over, we're going to figure out whether or not it's on purpose, if the permissions are inherited, and are they sharing more information than is needed. And then lastly, we're just going to kind of go over what the remediation looks like in these situations. Oftentimes it's just speaking with the user who is oversharing, saying, hey, you can't share everything via link. You're exposing student information or company information to the entire internet every time you do this. You can also revoke the shares directly from the console. So you can just say, you know what, I don't want this to be shared, and unshare it right there. And then there's also creating policies to warn users or automatically revoke shares depending on certain circumstances inside of there. So I just have a little test environment here without a ton of data, but I'll give you guys an idea of what this is going to look like inside of your consoles. So first thing I'll do is log in. And when I'm looking for this type of investigation, I just jump right into Drive files. And what I'll do inside of Drive files is I'm just going to start right on this main files sub-tab here. And what I'll do is I'll just type in the keywords that I want to find. So I'll start by looking for password. And right off the bat, what I'm seeing is a document called My Passwords made by this administrator user. That was me, obviously. So what I'll do here is the first thing I'm looking at is how it's being shared. So this document likely has passwords inside of it just based off of the name. So I'm curious how it's being shared. So I'm looking at the shared with column. And this icon here with the little globe is saying that it's being shared publicly on the internet to everybody. So anybody who has a link can access this file. So that's not good, obviously. So what I'll do on my end is I'll click on the name of it, get some metadata on the file, who created it, when it was created, etc. But I'll download the file and take a look at what's actually inside of it. Here we can see I've just got some usernames and passwords, a social security number as well. So this obviously is not a great way to be sharing or creating credentials. From an action standpoint, in the console, I can go to this actions column here and click on unshare. And I can actually just break the permissions right here within the platform. So I would just select the permission I want to remove and then click on share, and it gets rid of that shared with anyone on the web permission. Again, I would probably reach out to the user and say, hey, just so you know, you're sharing all of your passwords publicly on the internet. One thing about this files tab is this information is kind of time dependent. We keep 90 days of data inside of here, and that's going to be when the file is last modified. So it's not if the file is more than 90 days old, it was if the file hasn't been touched for more than 90 days, meaning it's a dormant file. So this is a great way to kind of get started in here, and it's very fast. But the other thing we can do is move to this live file search. And inside of here, we can look by file name and do the same search. But within this, we are able to set the time frame back, a year or 2 years, look at specific timeframes, and this will let you go back as far as you want. The downside of this live files search is this is a real-time API call, meaning we have to live within Google's limits of how much information we can pull from them. So depending on the size of your district, these searches could take anywhere from 5 seconds to 10 minutes, because it's going to have to parse through a lot of information. Inside of this live file search, you also have the ability to look for documents that contain the words. So I could also look for things like password, Visa, Bank of America, Excel. Really what you want to look for is kind of things a normal person might put inside of a document that allow them to store the credentials. So oftentimes we'll see utilities, credit cards, banking information, and then logins for whatever websites they use as well. So the live file search is a great kind of place to start here. In my environment, it's very small, so my searches are really quick, but I can perform the same search and I can see administrator did create this document here. And if I click on it, I can see the same share icon up in the top right. So I'm able to see how it's being shared on the web. Again, I can come to this actions column, click on share, and remove the publicly shared access from it. When we're looking at these files, we can go to, on the Files tab, we can go to this Folders tab. And this is actually going to show us which folder the file is being shared in. So if we're looking at these password documents, or we're seeing a lot of these link shares in the shared with column, and they're all coming from the same user. So here I'm seeing administrator seems to have quite a bit of file information being shared publicly on the internet. I can look at this Holders tab and see, okay, this one's in my drive. And this one's in a folder called accidental shares. Obviously on your end, it's not going to be so clearly labeled. But that starts to raise my eyebrows, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe they've got a folder that has inherited permissions that they're putting files in, not knowing that those files have permissions that are being pushed beyond the scope of your district. And that's where this managed drives comes into play. So in my investigation here, administrator looks to have a folder that they might be accidentally sharing or not understanding is being shared with everyone. And this managed drives functionality is awesome and very snappy. So all you need to do is type in the name of the user. And what you get is a real-time look into their Google Drive. So on the left, you have their folder structure. So I can see that this user has a homework folder, accidental shares folder that I noticed in the other thing, some CAM quarantine folders in the classroom folder. If I click on homework, I can actually see the files that are inside of this. And what's really awesome here is I can actually check the permissions of these folders within here. And here I can see that this accidental shares folder is being shared to everybody in ManagedMethods. So this is a domain-wide share. They've also got this file named submaterials inside of here. But what's awesome in this managed drives thing is I can go here and I can actually remove the access for the folder itself. So when we see these massive overshares or these folder accidental shares happening, we're able to remove those from within the product as well. As a side note, this is also a great tool if you guys have someone leaving the district, you're able to add them and change the ownership of the folder. If you have someone leaving and someone replacing them, this is a great place to kind of make that transition, save yourself some time, and get a lot of files transferred quickly. So just to kind of recount what I've been over here, what we want to be looking for when you guys have time and you're looking to kind of dive into the platform is looking for files that really do have suspicious names and identifying the users that those files belong to, and then remediating those problems within your environment. Again, kind of the big ones that I'll go over when I'm assisting someone in doing these investigations or helping them kind of do an audit of their environment is these keywords that I've listed out here. Mainly, I'm looking for things like bank, passwords, credentials, logins, student, and I'm just looking at the document names and looking for things that look like they probably have sensitive information inside of them. Once I have that, once I'm finding document names that are seeming suspicious to me, COVID results would be a great example of that. I'll download the file and take a look at it. Here, it looks like we've got some student information on positive COVID results within a district. This is obviously all just fake test data. But when I see that and I see that the file is being shared publicly on the internet, that's when I know that this is an issue. You're breaching FERPA, HIPAA, all kinds of stuff with those. So I encourage all of you to kind of dive into these. Let me know if you have questions about what you are finding or what would typically be acceptable within an environment. I know people kind of struggle thinking, okay, is this appropriate or inappropriate sometimes? And I'm always happy to give my 10 cents. You can reach out to support@managedmethods.com, and myself or another member of the team is usually pretty snappy about getting back to people. So all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share, and we can go over any questions people have, or I'm happy to jump into anything else as well.